Hello and welcome to the Georgia Postgame live show here on the Georgia Voice of College Football. I'm your host, Matt Green. And wow, what a Saturday of college football it was today. Obviously, the Georgia Bulldogs beat the UMass Minutemen 59-21. And that's why most of you are tuned in to watch my take on the Georgia Bulldogs today. But I feel like I would be burying the lead here if we didn't start with just what's happened in college football today. Like, this was upset Saturday in college football. It feels like we do this every year, right? We're in late October. Like, what are we going to do if there's 8 undefeated teams at the end of the year? And then we're in November. What are we going to do if we have all these one-loss teams? And what are we going to put the Mountain West team in the top 4? We might still be doing that, by the way. And we just freak out about, oh man, all the tiebreakers, everything, yada yada. And then these things tend to work themselves out. This is obviously a new era we're in with the obviously the 12-team playoff, but with in terms of the SEC and not having an SEC East and SEC West, so those tiebreakers are getting so crazy. But this was just an insane day in college football, in the SEC specifically. You know, you started off with Florida upsetting Ole Miss in the noon slate. Then you have Oklahoma just absolutely beat down the Alabama Crimson Tide. I'm glad Alabama didn't lose by a touchdown because they just got absolutely robbed on that one touchdown to Ryan Williams on 4th down. And, you know, who knows how that kind of changes the complexion of the game, too, if it's a 14-point game, kind of the intensity that Alabama has at that point. But with all that said, Alabama just absolutely got dominated. Kansas beat Colorado, and then Auburn right before we jumped on here. Auburn upsets Texas A&M in overtime. So I feel like my take on the weekend was just kind of everybody gets one. It feels like in the SEC, everybody gets one. And Arkansas got Tennessee early in the year. And I kept picking them. I was like, Arkansas, LSU, it could be a dangerous. I kept picking Arkansas. And then it was like, no, everyone just gets one. Like that. Don't get greedy. You got your one, Arkansas. If you're one of these mediocre teams in the SEC, it just feels like everyone gets one. I was not picking the Oklahoma Sooners to be one of those teams that got one this weekend, but I was picking the Auburn Tigers. I can take credit for that. It was just vibes. I wasn't basing it off of anything we'd seen so far in 2024. A&M had been the much better team, but it's Jordan-Hare Stadium at night, and they hadn't gotten one yet, and it was time they got one. Man, they were absolutely dominating this game early, 21-0. I thought once it went to overtime and Auburn didn't score there at the end, I thought A&M was just kind of, too much for them. In the end, I thought A&M was clearly the better team. What was it, 31-10, I think, at the start of the second quarter and on. So I thought as the further the game went on, A&M was going to win that game. But the new gimmicky overtime rules we have, we ended it right with the little 2-point conversion contest. I don't know how I feel about it. I would like to see them keep playing it out, the old school overtime. But yeah, Auburn, just an absolutely massive win. But yeah, just a crazy upset Saturday. And, I've been running this SEC calculator, the dude on Reddit. I always forget what the actual name is of the site, like bball something.net. But this guy's got his SEC calculator. I've been running through it all day. I'm pretty sure other people have too. I think the site crashed earlier. But if my calculations are correct now, the Georgia Bulldogs are in the SEC championship game. Where I'm looking at it now, when you have the SEC standings, with Georgia being the 2-loss team, this is so the winner of Texas and Texas A&M, I think, is still in. If A&M beats Texas, I think A&M still would get in the SEC championship game. But as you're looking at it right now, the Georgia Bulldogs with 2 losses, along with A&M, along with Tennessee, Georgia would own the tiebreaker with Tennessee, and even if Texas loses, Georgia would own the tiebreaker with them. So I'm fairly certain that, and then obviously Tennessee and Texas A&M didn't play this year. So I think we're sitting here now, Alabama, LSU, Ole Miss, South Carolina, Missouri, all with 3 conference losses. The SEC got absolutely just turned on its head today. So, yeah, I think that's I want to start. Obviously we're gonna get into UMass and what Georgia did on the field today, but this is the biggest story. Georgia's now in the SEC championship game. I don't know if all Georgia fans wanted this, to be honest. If you look at the SEC tiebreakers, the first tiebreaker is head to head. So obviously Georgia has the tiebreaker head to head with Texas and Tennessee. And then when you get past that, it's the record versus common opponents. When it comes to Texas A&M and Georgia, there's Florida. Texas A&M and Georgia's common opponents are Florida, Auburn, Mississippi State, and Texas. Well, Georgia went 4-0 against those 4 teams. A&M's already lost to one of them. So obviously they'd be 3-1 if they beat Texas, but they have the loss to Auburn. So I'm pretty sure under any scenario, Georgia's in the SEC championship now. So that would be Kirby Smart's 7th appearance in the SEC championship in 9 seasons. It's just insane the level of consistency of this Georgia program over the last 9 years since Kirby took this program over. But yeah, the craziness that was going to happen. I was talking about Auburn being a spoiler team in the final 2 weeks, and it was maybe they can get A&M, maybe they can get Alabama, and Georgia can find a way to get in the SEC championship. I would never put Oklahoma, Alabama on my radar as far as an upset. I didn't even consider it, if I'm being honest. Like I've accepted a long time ago that the team that Georgia played in Tuscaloosa in late September, I want to say, was that late September? Was that September or October? I can't remember, but yeah, that's clearly not the Alabama team. This team scored 3 points in 60 minutes against the Oklahoma Sooners. Jackson Arnold channeling his inner Matt Corral. This guy, or maybe just Cam Newton. I don't know. This guy was Oklahoma's run game tonight. So that was just an insane game. I was not expecting that at all. So, I had to start with the craziness that was happening around the SEC and around college football, because that's the biggest story now with Georgia getting to the SEC championship. I don't know if this is officially being reported, but I'm going to stake my reputation on it that Georgia has to be in under any sort of tiebreaker. I don't know what it gets a little convoluted with the record versus the highest ranked opponent, cumulative winning percentage of conference opponents, the record common opponents, and that sort of thing. It gets a little wacky, but I don't think there's anyone that has a tiebreaker over Georgia among this 1-loss and 2-loss over this 2-loss group. Potentially 4 teams with 2 losses if A&M beats Texas next week. Which, I mean, say what you want about Texas A&M tonight. Obviously, Auburn, the Jordan Hare Magic. It's A&M's not the first that it's taken, and it won't be the last for sure. But I think Texas having to go into College Station next week, I definitely don't think that's an automatic win. Like you saw Kentucky kind of hang around with Texas. Texas has just not looked impressive in, I would say, the majority of their conference games this year. So, they got the win, and they're most likely going to get to the SEC championship. Well, I can't even say that because I think they're favored to get to the SEC championship, but I think A&M and Texas, that's going to be to play Georgia, I'm pretty sure, in the SEC championship next week. So I think a lot of Georgia fans, especially once some of these upsets started early in the day, I think as a Georgia fan, they came in. Let me put the rankings up here. We had Georgia came in at number 10 in the college football playoff rankings coming into this past week. And the 11 seed, but the 10th ranked team. And once a couple of these teams lost, it's like, okay, Georgia might have a home playoff game. Now I'm liking it. Miss the SEC championship, just get a home playoff game, versus I don't even know who would have been against, maybe Arizona State or something. I don't know. We'll see who that ends up being. Maybe Indiana. I don't know. But now Georgia's trying to get one of those top 4 seeds. So yeah, we we still don't know what the SEC championship is going to, or what the committee is going to do about the loser of the SEC championship. If Georgia does lose and it's their third loss versus teams that didn't play in that game. But yeah, I don't know what they're going to do about that. But Penn State nearly lost. That was one that we don't have on the crazy upset Saturday today. But yeah, that would have put Georgia even higher. But yeah, with Indiana losing, Alabama losing, Ole Miss losing, Georgia's moving up at least 3 spots, and now potentially even higher if they can they can win the SEC championship and get one of those top 4 seeds. So with how kind of down of a year it's been at times for Georgia, it's crazy that it's another Kirby Smart football season that ends in Atlanta in the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So we'll see what happens with that. Now let's get into this game with UMass and Georgia on Saturday afternoon. Let me pull up the UMass stats I got here. So Georgia wins on Saturday afternoon, 59-21 against the UMass Minutemen. I think this was, a lot of good, some bad in this one. I will say, just because Kirby Smart raised us this way, all right, folks. He raised us to raise the standard, right? And as a Georgia fan, you see 59-21. What is that? A 38-point win. You're like, what is 21 points? What is that about? This is UMass. We're supposed to be shutting these guys out. What did this team score? 3 against Missouri? And I think Missouri may have played them at home, actually at UMass. And then they scored 20 against Mississippi State. So 21 against Georgia. That's definitely not what you want. In that sort of in that sort of game. So Kirby Smart definitely not happy with the defensive performance in this one. I think I saw some of the quotes that so let me see. What was the quote that Kirby gave for this one? He said, "I don't know that it was just tackling. We did not tackle well, but it was more than just tackling. He said, I hate to say it. I just don't know. I just don't think that our guys were ready to play and energized to play as their guys were. Their guys wanted it more than us, and it was very rare that I could sit up here and say that." So, that's not what you want to hear, obviously from the head coach talking about his team's performance in this game. But it's also why I low-key just hate these games, right? It's like the best that can happen is just you win a blowout and your stats look good and nobody gets hurt, right? Christian Miller, I think, was the most significant injury in this one. I think it was a shoulder. I know he was out for the game, but I don't know that's like a serious injury. So we'll see what happens with that. But I think for the most part, Georgia stayed healthy. Dylan Bell didn't play in this one. He's supposed to be back for the Georgia Tech game, but we'll see. And also, how do you feel about rushing guys back for Georgia Tech if you got that SEC championship game looming the next week? So that kind of changes Georgia's approach a little bit. I talked about how weird it was, being a Georgia fan and going into these final couple games, because this is not the first Georgia season that's kind of ended this way. I feel like under Mark Richt, a lot of years would end SEC play. You have Kentucky and Auburn those first weeks of November, and then you're done. You'll have some sort of cupcake, and then Georgia Tech, and then the season's over. So Georgia being done with conference play, with a couple games left on the schedule, is not a rare occurrence. But not having the SEC championship game on the other side of that is the weird part. So now that Georgia's got that SEC championship game, things are starting to feel a little bit more normal. The weird one this week is, it is going to be a short week with Georgia and Georgia Tech playing on Black Friday this year. Maybe they'll rock the black jerseys on Black Friday. No, we won't get into that. We did the blackout once. I'd always be down for the black jerseys, but I don't think the fans can do the blackout again. We already did the blackout. Like, we can't. I don't know. You can't recreate that. It happened. Don't do too much, but. Yeah, I think so just like more than to start with the negatives. UMass scoring 21 points is obviously not what you want in this game. 226 yards on the ground, 5.7 yards per carry that UMass averaged in this one. This is actually In 11 games now, Georgia's allowed over 100 yards 8 times this year. So it's kind of crazy. We're not used to this type of Georgia defense. I think 2018 is the last time I can remember Georgia's defense. Georgia just giving up a lot of plays on the ground. You're not used to seeing that when it comes to a Kirby Smart coach defense. So that's never good. I want to say, what are the games? It's Mississippi State is one of them. And then the dominant performance versus Clemson in Texas. Those are the only 3 teams that Georgia's held under 100 yards rushing this year. So that's got to be improved, especially depending on who you get matched up with in the SEC championship. Like Marcel Reed, this guy's looking a little bit like Jalen Milroe. When you saw how many problems Georgia had with Jalen Milroe in the first time they met earlier this season. But if it's Quinn Ewers, obviously, Georgia had a lot of success against Texas early in the season, and this will be at a neutral site instead of in Austin. So you got to like Georgia's chances there. But, let's not get ahead of ourselves. We still got the SEC championship game next week, and the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets, they are coming off a heartbreaking loss. They did lose that game, right? I was watching that game, and it was back and forth at the end. But I think NC State stole it. Georgia Tech scored late, but then NC State stole it at the end, right? Am I mistaken? Let me see. I know this is great. This is great radio right here. But no. NC State or Georgia Tech won this one, 30-29. How did it end? So did Tech hit the field goal to win it? Is that I am confusing myself. So no, Tech got the late touchdown run. That's what it was. So this was a wild game. I was actually watching this one was this Thursday night? But yeah, so Georgia Tech did pull that one out. They're now 7-4 on the year. I know 8-4 with a win over Georgia would absolutely, be massive for them and make their season. Like Georgia Tech, you forget how big of a rival it is until you lose. And then you're like, oh man, I hate losing to those guys. So Georgia Tech has been much improved. One of the toughest schedules in the SEC, one of the toughest schedules in the country, I want to say, coming into the year. I think it was like the top 6 or 7 schedules in the country were all SEC teams and then Georgia Tech. So yeah, a really tough schedule, and they've gone 7-4. So Georgia Tech is not to be taken lightly by any means, but obviously Kirby Smart hasn't lost to them since year one back in 2016. So that'll say. So getting back to UMass, 226 yards on the ground, 5.7 yards per carry. I just felt in general there were too many big plays. Like I think that's what the second play of the second half of the third quarter, that 75-yard touchdown. I don't know what Dan Jackson's doing on that play. Like he got to the ball, and I don't know. That's where the targeting comes in. I'm sure guys get to the ball. There are safety, flying across the field, and now you don't want to get a penalty, and you end up giving up a big play because you're worried about how you're going to hit the guy. I think if he's playing the ball, you probably intercept that. But it was just kind of a weird play, and UMass ends up going for 75 yards. And then the 68-yard run they gave up later in the third quarter. But then that was it. I mean, that's where it ended. That's one silver lining, I'll say, for the defensive performance. The 68-yard run, the 75-yard pass, those two plays were 40% of UMass's offense the entire game. So, there is that. I'm going to look at it, glass half full. Like, obviously, you don't want to be getting up 2 70-yard plays when you play UMass, but those were almost half of their offense the entire day. So on the final 5 drives of the game, after that 75-yard touchdown, UMass had 3 3-and-outs. I should say Georgia's defense forced 3 3-and-outs. UMass also missed a field goal, and then there was the strip sack fumble that Chris Cole returned for a touchdown, which I didn't do research on this. I will say I'm just coming straight off the dome, right off the top of the dome here. I'm pretty sure that's Georgia's first defensive touchdown on the season. That's much overdue. We've gone way too long without a defensive touchdown. I want to say 2021, I want to say the first score of the season and the last score of the season were both defensive touchdowns. It was the Chris Smith pick 6 versus Clemson, and then the Keely Ringo pick 6 versus Alabama in the national title game. And then I want to say in 2020, the first score of the season was a safety, and the last score of the season was a safety. I think it was 2020. That would have been the Arkansas opening up the Dwan Mathis start that Stetson Bennett came in for. I want to say the first points of the season were a safety, and then in that Cincinnati Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl, Ezekiel Jalari, I want to say, because Georgia hit the field goal late with Podlesny, and then I think it was Ojolari that got a sack and a safety or something like that. But yeah, Georgia's defense has been putting points on the board for several years now. So I seeing the first defensive touchdown of the season coming in game 11 versus UMass. That's much overdue. Someone can correct me in the chat if I'm wrong, if we have a defensive touchdown before then. But that's what I'll say. The defense did, at least after those couple big plays they gave up, they locked in. I think that probably goes to what Kirby's saying. This team, say what you want. Like, guys need to approach every opponent the same. Every game's the same, yada, yada, yada. The juice is not flowing for these games like it's flowing when the Tennessee Volunteers are in town, right? Like, even the Georgia Tech game, like, yeah, that might be a game that guys kind of overlook a little bit, but it's the in-state rivalry. There's some juice to that one. When you're playing these big-time SEC games, like, you don't have to have the extra motivation. Like, it's there. Against UMass, you might need to wake these guys up a little bit. 12:45 start, like, yeah, it's just not ideal. I will say, from a fan perspective, just a side note, 12:45, 1 o'clock, great time for these cupcake games, because you get like the staggered time. You get to get into these like noon kickoffs, Indiana, Ohio State today, Florida, Ole Miss. And then, those games go to overtime or go to halftime. You're watching your game. It's a little staggered. You get to watch the fourth quarters of those games and then watch the end of Georgia. I had the two TVs working, staying busy with the remote game. But yeah, it was, I do like that. If it's going to be one of these cupcake games, I always hated when you have a cupcake game and it's 7:30 SEC network and you're working opposite the primetime games. So I do like that 1 o'clock, 12:45 slot that we found ourselves in today. But I'll say, for the positives in this game, you got to go with Carson Beck. I think Carson Beck, there was this talk of what is wrong with Carson Beck a few weeks back. Does he have the yips? What's happening? And I pushed back on that so much. Carson Beck was not playing well, for a few weeks there, just throwing way too many interceptions. The decision making was off, but he wasn't getting a lot of help from these receivers. And he was also making bad decisions on his own right. The offensive line was having its struggles as well. I felt like Carson Beck was getting way too much of the blame. And the last 2 weeks, 6 touchdowns, no interceptions. This guy's playing a lot better. And in this game, obviously it's UMass, but in this game, 20 of 31, 297 yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. He had 4 touchdowns on Georgia's first 4 drives of the game. This offense was really, dialed in. It was just nice. And that's what I wanted to see. That was kind of my key to the game, was just, let's see a bunch of dudes catching passes. Like, let's see. And that's exactly what we got. We had 12 different receivers catch a pass in this game. Georgia putting up 59 points. Like, Carson Beck, just like I said kind of before this game, like, when you're a shooter, in basketball and you're struggling, like, you need to get some free throws, you get to the line, get some layups, you see it go in a couple times, and then you start feeling good. And I almost feel like that's how this game was. Like, you start throwing some deep balls, throwing some touchdowns, celebrating in the end zone. Like, it just starts to make you feel good. Let's get the vibes going. And you also saw Georgia with the 4th down in the red zone, be aggressive and go for it. And Beck threw the touchdown to Cash Jones. But I'm really starting to like the way these playmakers are coming along, because, the Georgia traditionally plays like, 7, 8 wide receivers, and you look up at the end of the year and there's 5, 6 guys that have like 30 catches on the season, and there's no one that has the 1,000-yard season, obviously, because everyone loves to talk about how Georgia hasn't had a 1,000-yard receiver since Terrence Edwards back in 2002. Everyone does ignore that Georgia's had like 4 or 5 900-yard receivers. I will say that. I think AJ Green was over 900 yards like all 3 years. Bowers had a couple too, and then obviously Bowers had 700-800 yards, missing like 4 or 5 games last year, 3 or 4 games. But disregard all that. But with all that said, Georgia this year has only been playing like 3-4 wide receivers, like all the snaps. And it's been Dylan Bell, it's been Arian Smith, it's been Dominic Lovett, and all of those guys have had their issues with drops. And I think because we don't have the deep receiving core with Colby Young out, with Thomas getting kicked off the team before the season's, and Colby Young being suspended. Like this receiving core was not deep to begin with, and now you're seeing. I thought we'd see more Nitro Tuggle after seeing him with a couple catches in the Tennessee game, but we did see a lot of the young guys. I'm really impressed with how this tight end group is starting to emerge, because I pushed back so much at this idea of Georgia being tight end you. Like, I know it's cool to talk about, like, yeah, I've had a bunch of tight ends, but like, we haven't had like that many superstars. Like, let's be honest. And Brock Bowers is a damn unicorn. Like, Georgia's never going to have Georgia's never had a tight end like Brock Bowers, and they never will have another tight end like Brock Bowers, as far as I'm concerned. And if they do, we'll celebrate it when it happens. But let's not ever expect that, because I think this guy's the best tight end to come out of college football in the last 20 years. I don't know. He might be the greatest college tight end prospect of all time. But you obviously look at what he's doing rookie year in the NFL, and it speaks for itself. But, Randy McMichael was great. Leonard Pope was great. There's all kinds of Orson Charles. Georgia's had some good tight ends. Brock Bowers is just a freak. There's never a time until Brock Bowers was on the team that Georgia's best playmaker was the tight end. And like, Georgia fans have this like strange obsession with the tight end position, but Brock Bowers was legit the best playmaker on the team. Usually that best playmaker is a running back or a receiver. In 2021, 22, and 23, it was the tight end, and it was Brock Bowers. So you fed him the rock. You shouldn't feed any other tight end the ball the way you fed Brock Bowers. With that said, we know what Georgia wants to do and kind of, and run the ball. They haven't been that good of a running team this year. They've been a bad running team this year. I think you can safely say that. Below average for sure. But with what Georgia, how they want to block with multiple tight ends, you have to use those guys in the receiving game, just to keep the defense honest. And I think you've seen the last couple weeks, Oscar Delp with 3 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks. Like, Oscar Delp, while I didn't think he was going to be remotely close to Brock Bowers, like some people were kind of saying, I did think Oscar Delp was going to be a very good college tight end, and you haven't seen him do much this year. So I think a lot of that probably is some of Carson Beck's struggles and maybe forcing it into coverage where he shouldn't, but early in the season. But Oscar Delp has been coming along, and you saw the athleticism on that touchdown he had today. Like, this guy looks like a player. And Lawson Lucky had 4 for 60 yards in this game. He's up to 20 catches for 296 yards and 3 touchdowns on the season, averaging 15 yards a catch. Like, every time Lawson Lucky gets the ball, he seems to be in space, and he looks good. He looks athletic. He's got speed. So I like seeing Lawson Lucky involved in Ben Jurasik. I don't know if he did much in this one. He had 1 catch for 9 yards in this one, but Jurasik has also come along. So having 3 good tight ends, being able to, get those guys in there to block and also be able to throw it to them. That was one of the better aspects of Bobo's play calling against Tennessee. And then you saw Lucky and Delp. That was the only catch Delp had in this one, but Lucky was the second leading receiver in this game. And you're seeing him make an impact. So Arian Smith with another 100-yard game and a touchdown in this one. Dominic Lovett also had a touchdown. So yeah, like I said before, 12 different guys with a catch in this one. Carson Beck with 297 yards. Gunnar Stockton 3 for 4 for 45 yards. So this passing game, I think Georgia had over 550 yards in this one. 550 exactly. So 342 passing, 208 on the ground. Really balanced. Like, that's the kind of thing you want to see. No serious injuries, like I said before. And then also, I still don't know what the status of Trevor Etienne is the rest of the way. You're seeing Nate Frazier He had his career high with 136 yards and 3 touchdowns in this one. Nate Frazier has star potential. I know this is UMass. I'm not overreacting to this game specifically, but if you're going to lose a guy like Trevor Etienne and you have to lean on a true freshman, at least it's a guy who has some star potential. We know about the fumbles. He's had fumble issues at times, but he also looks pretty damn explosive when he's running the ball. So he looks, I would say Nate Frazier has like the most star quality, just potential of any Georgia running back I've seen since DeAndre Swift. I know James Cook was a really good running back for the Bills last year, and James Cook was a very good running back for Georgia. But I don't know. I don't see the same just kind of burst of a James Cook. I mean, I know he was athletic and he was a mismatch in the receiving game. I'm not trying to. I don't want James Cook to catch any strays here. But DeAndre Swift, when you first saw him as a freshman, you're like, okay, this guy's got something. And I feel like that's what I thought when I saw Nate Frazier. Like, this guy, he's got something. He's explosive. He hits the hole. I'm really excited with how he's kind of emerged in the last few weeks. Like, Tennessee is a damn good defense, and Georgia wasn't able to run a lot on them, but they were able to run some. And I think a lot of that is just how explosive Nate Frazier is. So seeing Nate Frazier kind of come into his own, I think that was a very encouraging sign for this game for sure. All right. So that's the last thing I'll say about this game. Ultimately, you win this game 59-21. You can't take, I would say you can take negatives out of games like this. When you win games like this, 27-24 with a last minute touchdown. Yeah, you can look at the results of these games and think, what the hell is wrong with this team? But, if you score 60 points on them, you score 70 points, it doesn't mean that, oh yeah, they've righted the ship. Like you saw early in the season, like Tennessee and Missouri and Ole Miss, like people tried to act like those are the best offenses in college football because of what they did against Kent State and some of these other garbage teams and Georgia Southern early in the season. No disrespect to the folks from Statesboro, but yeah, these games just don't really mean anything. Auburn, I think you saw, hang 60. Arkansas hung 60 early in the season. Like, yeah, they don't mean anything in September. They don't mean anything in November. Luckily, you get out of there with no injuries. And I think for the most part, Georgia did. We'll figure out, in a few days, the severity of Christian Miller. I don't think Kirby Smart had any details on that. But yeah, that's all you can really say about this one. So, like I said, the SEC championship implications got a whole lot more interesting today. I think Georgia is in the SEC championship, and it's pretty crazy to think. I don't think most Georgia fans. I'm not sure most Georgia fans wanted to make the SEC championship. To be honest, I think they were down with just getting in the playoffs, getting healthy. And that's what I said. Going to Tennessee, I felt like Tennessee game was the season finale. And it was like, okay, let's just win this Tennessee game and let's try to get healthy for the college football playoff. And now seeing Georgia as like 11, you're like, okay, I'm not liking seeing Georgia at 11. So yeah, like I was kind of alluding to earlier, Georgia was 10th in the rankings at the 11th seed going in, and now Oregon gets. Dude, Oregon didn't play today. Ohio State gets a win over Indiana. They're going to be number 2. Texas gets the win over who did Texas play? I'm blanking on Kentucky. Texas got the win over Kentucky. They're going to be number 3. Penn State is still overrated at number 4. Notre Dame's probably, if Indiana lost at 5, so Notre Dame's probably going to jump up there at 5. Alabama lost at 6. Ole Miss lost at 9. I guess Miami could jump up to number 6 behind Notre Dame. Georgia jumps in at 7. And then I guess Tennessee at 8. I guess Miami doesn't matter because Miami's getting one of those top 4 seeds if they get in. Miami and SMU in the conference championship game. So I'm thinking going into next week, I'm expecting Oregon to be the 1 seed, Texas to be the 2 seed, and then the 3 and 4 coming from the conference champions, which would be Miami and Boise State currently. Although, shoot, I'm on the top of the tallest mountain yelling that the Big 12 champion needs to be that 4 seed regardless. Boise State has no business being the number 4 and getting a first round bye. I'm not even going to get into that right now. Arizona State, if they run the table, I don't even know who it is. There's like 4 2-loss teams, I think, at the top of the Big 12 right now, with Colorado going down today, BYU. So we'll see what happens in the Big 12. It's craziness over there. But so yeah, Oregon number 1, Texas 2, Miami the 3 seed, Boise State the 4 seed. Then that would have Ohio State be the 5 seed, and I guess Penn State be the 6 seed, Notre Dame be the 7, and then Georgia would get that 8 seed in a home playoff game. So I guess I just hope they do something about the rematches, because if you do something like Georgia and Tennessee in the first round of the playoff, that's just going to be the dumbest thing ever. So if it turns into, Georgia versus, I don't even know what it's going to look like. I guess Tennessee probably is going to be the one that jumps up there to number 9, but I don't know. I think if you man, this is going to look real weird. I think Tennessee should be ahead of Indiana, but maybe Indiana falls to 9, and then you have Tennessee going at Notre Dame, or Tennessee going at Penn State, and then I guess that would be maybe Arizona State or someone from the Big 12 going in to play. Who would that be? Ohio State. So I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen within these last couple weeks. Texas A&M is obviously going to drop. But Texas A&M still can make the SEC championship, which is just weird. But yeah, this last few weeks in the college football season, it's going to get pretty interesting. But Georgia should like where they are. Georgia should like where they're sitting at this point in the season, especially, this is the toughest schedule I can ever remember as a Georgia fan. That stretch starting in Alabama. What was Georgia's? What was that? Was it a 7-game stretch where you went at Alabama, Auburn, Mississippi State, at Texas, Florida, at Ole Miss, and then Tennessee? Maybe the toughest stretch in the history of Georgia football. Like, you look at these top-ranked SEC teams, and Tennessee has played, Georgia and Alabama. Texas has played Georgia. Ole Miss had only played Georgia. Like, a lot of these teams had only played 1 or maybe 2 of those top 10, top 15 SEC teams. Georgia played all of them. And so this schedule was just so brutal. We had Clemson outside of the conference as well. So for everything, the adversity, you had your quarterback throwing 12 interceptions in a 4-game span or something like that. For everything that was happening with Georgia in this team, how bad it felt in October, the fact that you're sitting here at 9-2, the week of the Georgia Tech game, and everything is still on the table. A few weeks ago, we were saying everything, but we really meant Georgia can still win a national championship. Now, Georgia can still win the conference championship, get the first round bye, win the national title. Like, everything is still on the table for the Georgia Bulldogs in 2024. And I don't think anyone was thinking that a couple weeks ago. So you got to be excited about where Georgia's season and where it sits today, especially because it feels like the worst of it's behind us. It feels like Carson Beck has kind of, gotten things together. It feels like this team is gelling at the right time. You've seen the performances against a team like Alabama or Ole Miss, but you also saw the performances against a Texas and a Tennessee. And I mean, if we're being honest, Texas and Tennessee, those teams are looking like they're going to be in the playoff. Alabama and Ole Miss aren't. So I think that was the most exciting. Like, not that Georgia's ever trying to dodge an opponent or anything, but I got on here with you a few weeks ago and I talked to you about it. That Ole Miss shellacking that Georgia took, I had to rack my brain for some Kirby Smart games that had been just domination like that. Like, we haven't experienced that. As Georgia fans, we've experienced that plenty. We lived through some of those Mark Richt games where we just didn't show up for whatever reason. But that doesn't happen a lot with Kirby Smart teams. So Ole Miss was a team that just physically dominated the Bulldogs. And if that was a team you ran into in December or January on a neutral site, you feel better about yourself than going into Vaught Hemingway Stadium, but still not feeling great about how that defensive line just absolutely whooped your offensive line. So having Ole Miss as a team who I assume is off the table with all these losses today, I don't know if some of these 3-loss teams are going to find a way to get back into the playoff picture. I started digging in once I started getting to that 10, 11, 12 seed. It started getting a little bit harder with some of the losses we saw today. So we'll have to dig into that next week and see what the college football rankings. They're going to have a fun time, I'm sure, on Tuesday night. They're going to have a lot more fun this Tuesday than they did last Tuesday because there's going to be a lot less arguing. You got Indiana off the table. Now that Alabama and Ole Miss have fallen, Georgia over Tennessee is a nice little clean head-to-head. Two teams sitting right there back-to-back. You don't have to worry about some type of crazy three-way tie because that's one thing I was thinking early in the day was with Ole Miss losing, okay, now the Georgia, sorry, let me start over. With Ole Miss losing, you had this log jam of Alabama, Ole Miss ahead of Georgia and Tennessee, even though they hadn't all played each other. But then once Ole Miss lost, well, you turned that head-to-head that Alabama and Ole Miss had over Georgia, you now turned that into a three-way tie where Alabama beat Georgia, Georgia beat Tennessee, and Tennessee beat Alabama. So now the head-to-head isn't really relevant for those three teams. The resume is what matters because it's a three-way tie, right? And you go in a resume argument, Georgia wins that one. So that was already going to get interesting, kind of what the committee did with that versus, yeah, Notre Dame probably just had their best win of the season, right? Quote unquote, versus number 18 Army. Cool. Everyone respects that victory, right? You are what your record says you are, right? So I guess Notre Dame was going to stay ahead of those SEC teams regardless, but I think in Miami's obviously going to be right there, but going to get a higher seed based on the conference championship. So if they do win it. So ultimately, I think the ACC might have become a two-bid league this weekend, if we're being honest. Like SMU still sitting there at one loss, Miami's still sitting there at one loss. If those two teams can make it to the finish line, and only one of them's getting their second loss in the ACC championship, I think there's a chance that the loser of the ACC championship still gets in the college football playoff because SMU is potentially jumping into the top 10 after this week. I think that's the one I was sleeping on when I was doing my little projection just now. So SMU and Arizona State are definitely, jumping into that top 12, into that playoff picture, as well as Tennessee, who is, I think, the first team out a week ago. So this playoff picture got a lot crazier looking this week. So I think the Georgia Bulldogs fans, I don't know. Like I said it a couple times. I don't know if we wanted to get to the SEC championship, but we're here now, and it's not going to be against the Alabama Crimson Tide. So there is that. Georgia has had some success against teams not named Alabama, and when it comes to Atlanta, so it's not going to be Alabama. So we can all be excited about that. And who knows? Maybe Auburn can get two. Everybody gets one. That's what I was saying when the show started. Everybody gets one. Oklahoma got one. Auburn got one. And we'll see if they can get another one next week. But it's crazy. This season flies by. We have just one more game left the rest of the way. Georgia Bulldogs sitting at 9-2. And I'll admit it. I'm a person who was not a fan of the college football playoff expansion, going to 12 teams. You could have convinced me to 6 or 8. You could have talked me into that. But I have to say right now, I'm loving that there's a 12-team format, that Georgia's sitting here as a 2-loss team going into the Tech game with, basically being a lock for the college football playoff, knock on wood, if they don't lose to the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. So Georgia's sitting in a really good position right now. And if it were a 14 playoff, I think Georgia would still have a case. What they might be being like number 7, going into I guess if this is a 4-team playoff, Georgia's probably like number 6 or 7 going into the rankings, SEC championship. And if they beat number 2 Texas, that's enough to jump them into the top 4. So I think in a 4-team playoff, this team still could have gotten in with 2 losses. But in the 12-team format, they're basically guaranteed. So big time win. I can't say big time win. That was a reaction. Solid win for the Bulldogs. 59-21 over UMass. Check me out on every Tuesday at 8:00. I'll be coming at you live with our Georgia Bulldogs live show. And we'll be talking Georgia Tech and anything else that comes up. Recruiting signing day, I think, is like 2 weeks away. As crazy as that is, and Georgia's in it for a bunch of big time dudes. So there's going to be more crazy signing day news. Bryce Underwood just flipped to Michigan. I want to say Michigan flipped another LSU commit too. So, in this era of NIL, signing day is going to be even crazier than it once did. Although it has lost its luster now and being right here jammed into the middle of the regular season. I will say, or in the postseason, I should say, I will say they need to get rid of the early signing day. Do just one back in February or March and just call it what it is, because this is craziness with the conference championships, the playoff, and you need to sign the next generation of players for your program as well. So I'm not the czar of college football. Who knows? Maybe one day. But that's all I have for you this week. Georgia Bulldogs 59-21 over the UMass Minutemen. We will talk with you guys, like I said, Tuesday at 8:00. Please like and subscribe to the channel. It always helps us out. And thanks everyone for watching. Appreciate it.